What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If you thought Sony's layoffs yesterday were enough for 1 week, you ain't seen nothing yet. So today, EA announced they are laying off 670 staff across their studios. With it comes studio closures, a refocusing on their key brands as they define it, mobile game shutdowns, and a focus on moving away from licensed IP. So let's get into this. So last March, 6% of EA's workforce, 800 employees, were laid off. And again in December, the F1 developer Codemasters also received layoffs to, quote, meet evolving business needs and priorities. And today, February 28th, 2024, we see that another 670 people are being let go. It's not entirely defined who this affects. We do know that Ridgeline Studios, who was formed back in 2021 to work on the Battlefield single-player experiences alongside DICE to sort of allow them to focus on the multiplayer aspect of the games, has been completely shut down and their studio is closing. So all future single-player Battlefield experiences will be shifting over to Criterion, which it's nice to see that they are still investing in single-player, but I wonder what this means for the rumored Battlefield game from this year and or next year that's releasing. We do know that that is supposed to have a Battle Royale component, which is a bit strange. It's not 2018 anymore, where every game is trying to sort of be a Battle Royale. EA already tried its hand at Battle Royale with Battlefield 5 in, I think it was Operation Firestorm or Project Firestorm, and that never really took off. The mode's still active today, but nobody's really playing it. Again, there are enough incumbent Battle Royale games that it's really... It just seems like an odd decision to sort of invest in that stuff. EA CEO Andrew Wilson had the following to say about the layoffs in general, that the company is, quote, moving away from development of future licensed IP that we do not believe will be successful in our changing industry. In a note to staff, Andrew Wilson, EA CEO, describes the moving away from licensed IP as the following, quote, this greater focus allows us to drive creativity, accelerate innovation, and double down on our biggest opportunities, including our owned IP, sports, and massive online communities, to deliver the entertainment players want today and tomorrow. This actually seems pretty logical when you consider that to license Star Wars is probably pretty similar to license Spider-Man, and we know from the Insomniac leaks that Sony's costs associated with licensing Spider-Man from Marvel is in the $200 million range for Spider-Man 2. No idea if that figure was smaller during 2018 or during 2020 with Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales respectively, but I would imagine that with IP like The Mandalorian, the rumored Black Panther game in development, along with an Iron Man game also in development at EA, along with the Star Wars Jedi IP, which has been Respawn's baby since they first debuted with that franchise, the licensing costs associated with these games is probably costing EA $500 million collectively, which is to say nothing of the additional terms likely associated with these contracts that allow Disney more money beyond just licensing the IP. Now, it's unfortunate seeing another 670 people lose their jobs. I do think it is smart that EA is going to sort of shift its focus to its core franchises and sort of move away from sort of spreading the field too much with regards to how many projects they have incubating across all their different teams and all the different studios they have. It does make you wonder that what the idea is behind closing Ridgeline. They do mention that Criterion will take over Battlefield single-player experiences, but the next Battlefield game is supposed to come out early 2025, possibly fall 2025. It's unclear if Criterion is simply picking up the pieces from Ridgeline after they've been closed, or if they're being instructed to sort of reboot the single-player experience for the next Battlefield game, if that experience will ship at all with that title. In line with them shifting away from licensed IP, they do speak to $35 to $45 million in, quote, costs associated with licensor commitments. This is most certainly early cancellation fees and early cancellation clauses likely associated with any of the games they were working on related to licensed IP. We know that Marvel and Sony have similar agreements with related to Wolverine and Spider-Man. It's clear they're serious about moving away from that kind of stuff, considering these projects will no longer move forward and never see any revenue. The total headcount back in March of 2023, during EA's previous layoffs, was 13,400. After today, it reaches around 12,900. In an SEC filing, EA did state that the cost of these layoffs will cost them roughly $125 to $165 million related to severance payments, office space reductions, and does include the licensor commitments. So laying off these staff will cost EA about $140 million roughly. Now, despite the closure of Ridgeline, not all the developers were laid off. Some of them are being folded back into Ripple Effect. Now, Ripple Effect Studios, you may know from its previous name as DICE Los Angeles, who was also previously Danger Close Games, back when EA was trying to do Medal of Honor as a sort of companion FPS to Battlefield in off years, back when those were leapfrogging their release dates every other year. So it's unfortunate news to see more people lose their jobs. The industry has been in a really sort of violent reduction since last year, and it obviously continues today. I think for a lot of us, we're sort of waiting for the shoe to drop with regards to Ubisoft and Take-Two and many other publishers who sort of haven't announced large layoffs. Suicide Squad having just released, I would imagine Warner Brothers is also going to be laying off staff. It's really just a matter of when, not if. Hopefully following what will likely be layoffs at Rocksteady, they can get focused back onto their single-player titles that I think everybody really wanted from them, despite getting something like Suicide Squad. In following these layoffs, EA is trying to focus back on their big franchises. It's about the same strategy that a lot of these different companies are having, which is tightening the belts, removing a lot of staff that probably were incubating titles that are obviously being canceled, and to refocus on their core franchises. And for them, that is EA Sports, Apex Legends, Star Wars Jedi, Iron Man, Black Panther, Battlefield, Need for Speed, Dragon Age, Skate, and The Sims. They don't mention Mass Effect, even though we do know that Mass Effect is still coming. As well, Dragon Age Dreadwolf, that game is really far away, so it does seem odd that they mention that by name but not Mass Effect, which I would imagine is farther along than Dragon Age is. Inspired these layoffs, EA did report in December of 2023 record net bookings of nearly $2.4 billion. So the only confirmed cancellation we have from this is the Mandalorian Star Wars FPS game that was previously being worked on at Respawn. Following today's news, I think we'll continue to see these layoffs more and more. There are a lot of large publishers and developers that have not had layoffs yet, and that seems more of a when, not if, for the industry at the moment. We know the industry isn't growing. We know the industry has stagnated on console and PC, and that's why you've seen a lot of these companies move towards mobile. Or in some cases start pushing on PC where they previously haven't been pushing on PC to release games and products. So I think we're going to continue to see staff reductions. We'll continue to see these issues. I do find it somewhat responsible that EA is moving away from licensed IP. Doesn't seem to make the most sense to invest as much money as you might have to invest in any AAA game, but adding on the factor of, a 9-figure licensing fee and other potential costs related to licensing an IP like Star Wars. If this restructuring is what it takes for EA to get to a place where it's going to continue to release single-player games and sort of leave its live service efforts in its sports franchises and not muddy the waters of Battlefield and Respawn's projects, then I think the focus away from licensed IP is a wise move. And finally, along with these layoffs, EA is closing down a lot of different mobile games that had previously launched, even just within the last year. Games like F1 Mobile Racing and MLB Tap Sports, these games are being closed. They obviously did have, at one point, an Apex Legends mobile game, which I did play and was decently fun, albeit a much more abbreviated experience than the traditional Apex. I think if they want something like that to exist and continue and to be successful, it really should be like an accessory product to the traditional core entries in the franchise. We got news recently that Call of Duty Warzone Mobile will be launching in March and will have cross progression with the core product of Warzone. I think something like that game is going to be quite popular, considering that it's, again, an accessory product as opposed to something like its own standalone progression like COD Mobile, which has been successful for them. But if you're trying to get people who are traditionally used to playing games on a controller and traditionally used to playing games in front of a TV to pull out their phones and play games on there, having that sort of synergy and promise of cross-integration with the traditional core product is quite valuable in user acquisition. So EA looks pretty healthy. They still employ nearly 13,000 people. It's clear that they're doing well business-wise despite some missteps last year with Immortals of Avium. A much more curious case will be Ubisoft. We still have not seen any large layoffs yet, despite reports of them fighting off takeovers internally, as well as the small layoffs they did last year of around 124 people. We know that The Lost Crown did decently well for them. We know things like Siege and Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Mirage have done well for them in recent years, but they very much are a company that needs more wins, given things like Skull and Bones, which certainly came out recently to subpar player numbers and sales, as just under 1 million people even played the game, including free trials and purchases. So, what does this all mean for EA's business? Respawn is continuing to develop Apex Legends and continuing to develop its Star Wars Jedi series. Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order have both sold pretty well, despite performance issues for its most recent entry. We know that the third entry is in development. DICE is continuing to develop Battlefield, and with 2042 having turned around, I think there's a bit more renewed confidence in them to deliver a new Battlefield experience in 2025. Despite Ridgeline closing, not all of the developers were laid off, so they're being moved over to Criterion, which means single-player experiences for Battlefield are going to continue. Not entirely sure what those might mean. I was never really a fan of the more abbreviated campaigns we saw in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, and much more enjoyed things that were more akin to Call of Duty campaigns like in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Even still, it's great to see that EA isn't shying away from single-player portions of that game, and we'll continue to invest in that going forward. And while I don't play the sports games, seeing them renew their commitment to those kind of franchises, it does show confidence that those games might fill the hole that would normally be looked at as sort of vacuous with regards to publishing live service content. We've seen a lot of these companies want to publish live service games and want to get under their umbrella some sort of very prolific, very popular, and very lucrative live service game. And seeing EA let Apex and let Madden and let their FIFA replacement sort of fill that void for them and fill that hole for them, it allows things like the Jedi Survivor series of games to continue. It allows things like Battlefield to maybe be less live service and more of their own traditional multiplayer and traditional single-player games. This restructuring seems more like Sony's, which is based around strategy and based around renewing their focus or what their core products will be, and less about operational expenditure and less about needing more money to sort of fuel their production. It's actually a bit refreshing to see that when there are cancellations, they aren't about games that are multiple years in development, but rather games that are sort of in their pre-production stage, like we saw with the Star Wars FPS that Respawn was developing. I think it would have been a lot more painful to see with things like the Asper Media KOTOR remake that was clearly very far along and then eventually canceled, or compared to something like The Last of Us Online, where these games were in development and playable and based on some reports were fun from playtesters who had actually played the games, despite the fact that they will never see the light of day. That's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.